Today I'm going to be talking about the history of the English language and how it's evolved over time from the beginnings all the way to modern day. I'll touch a little bit on American English, even though for the purposes of our course, it's not really going to be our focus. But since I'm talking about the evolution of the English language and how that pertains to us, I thought that that would be interesting to include a little bit about American English as well. I think it's important for people to understand like the evolution of the language and like where it began and how it came about, because so many of the words that we use today have been there since the beginning of the English language. So in the beginning, during the 5th century, there were three Germanic tribes, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, and they crossed the North Sea from what we now call Denmark and northern Germany, and they invaded and conquered Britain. And they named this new territory Englaland, which meant the land of the Angles. So at the time, the people that were living there, the inhabitants of Britain, they spoke a Celtic language, but as the way that it normally goes when you have invading tribes, i.e., the Native Americans, they were pushed west and north by those Anglo-Saxons and Jutes into what we now call Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, where they still speak variations of that Celtic language there. These invading tribes all spoke very similar languages, which kind of morphed into a common language that they called English, which is where our term English derives from. So those similar languages, they became known, that English became known as Old English. And there in the center of the screen, you can see the first alphabet, the first Anglo-Saxon alphabet. When you're looking at it, you don't see a whole lot of letters that are very similar to what we use today. We have the F, the R, the B, the M here. They're all standing for different runes in that early runic alphabet. And then when you look at it in print, it doesn't feel very familiar to us. However, about half of the words that we use today in modern English have Old English roots. It was spoken until around 1100 AD when the French came. So in 1066, the Normans from France, led by William the Conqueror, they invaded and conquered England. Okay, so obviously they're bringing with them their French language. The upper classes began to speak a French English blend, which we now call Middle English. However, the lower classes, they didn't have access to education, so they continued to speak in the Old English form. What you see in front of you there in the center is a sample of the original text from the Canterbury Tales, which was written in Middle English. We'll take a look at that during the course of the term. Um, we're starting to look a little bit more like of the English that we kind of recognize. However, there's still some different spelling and different phonetical things that Middle English was very famous for, these long vowels that kind of drug out the sound of the words. But we call this French infused English Middle English. In 1500s, there was a change. It was a shift. It was called the Great Vowel Shift, and it created a new kind of, or a big change in pronunciation. Those long vowels that I told you about that were kind of trademark of Middle English, they started becoming shorter and shorter. And as a result, many new words and phrases entered the English language. Um, Also, the printing press was invented, which meant that there was now a common language in print. So spelling and grammar became fixed. The London dialect becomes the standard dialect. And the first English dictionary was published in 1604, which obviously changed or revolutionized a lot of the spread of the language. If you didn't understand a word, you could look it up in the dictionary, and then that helps the language grow. So late modern English is technically the same realm that we're under today in Britain, in England. Late modern English started about 1800. The major difference is the vocabulary. So we had a couple of things that were happening. You had the Industrial Revolution, which created a need for new words, technological language, vocabulary, those kinds of things. And then the British Empire was expanding and kind of taking the show on the road and adapting new words, foreign words from many different countries, adapting those into the English language as well. Okay, so our particular version of English, American English, started from about 1600, obviously, the colonization of North America, and it helped create a distinct American version of English. However, because we left before the late modern period, our American English is more like the English of Shakespeare, the early modern, than it is of current or late modern British English. And our English was also influenced by the people that were already here and the people that were brought in. So the Spanish and the French and the Native Americans were all here, traders, fur trappers, and then, of course, your Native American populations. You think back to like the first Thanksgiving and all that stuff, and they taught us words for corn and all different kinds of things like that. And so, but then you also had an influence of South African languages when the American settlers and actually the traders, the Spanish and French traders started bringing in slaves from South Africa. So all those influences kind of helped build the American version. It's kind of a melting pot of multiple different English languages all together into our distinct version of American English today.